Good morning. It is 9 a.m. It is the 7th day of November. I am your grumpy guide to all things gaming. Ooh, GM. And it rained last night. Wasn't that wonderful? Sadly, it only lasted for like half an hour, but still was wonderful. So, the elections are still going on. Apparently, stuff is still happening. The machine is still working. So, take your frustration for a second and just go, you know what? Democracy, the republic, is actually working the way it's supposed to work. That's why all this is happening, because we as a people finally went, you know what, enough. We're actually going to vote and do our job. And speaking of voting and expressing your opinion, as you know, I posted a vlog yesterday about the spoilers that Wizards of the Coast released regarding the end of the year splat book, Tasha's book of bubbling everything, or whatever it's called. And I listed everything we knew so far, the 30 some odd subclasses, and some information about, the magic, the switches to the magic system and the combat system, and basically how, supposedly, according to Wizards of the Coast, this is going to change the way we look at Dungeons and Dragons. Just like, every other splat book and every other edition changes the way we look at Dungeons and Dragons. Now, obviously, I am not the best person probably to talk about this, because of my opinion of 5th edition is not great. I mean, it's not bad. As we know, there are things I like about 5th edition, and I enjoy playing it because it's a social experiment. And 5th edition is kind of like playing Monopoly or eating Ritz crackers. Sure, I'll play Monopoly if there's nothing else to play, and sure, I'll eat Ritz crackers because there's nothing else to eat, and they are kind of enjoyable occasionally, and Monopoly is kind of fun occasionally, especially if you have a good group. But obviously, if something better was offered to me, like a game of Axis and Allies, or a nicely made plate of nachos, I'd choose that instead. So, in response, my friend GM Bloodworth, host of the amazing channel Unscripted and Unchained, posted his opinion of Tasha's, and so I thought I'd take a moment to do a virtual response and respond to that. And and this is not anything new. It's not like Wizards of the Coast is doing something they've never done before. This is a common practice. It's existed as long as Dungeons and Dragons has existed. I mean, if Dungeons and Dragons existed in a void where there was nothing else, which it had for like 2 years, then, things probably things like this would still happen, but it wouldn't happen as frequently. But, I mean, the game evolves, the needs of the player base evolve, the target audience evolves. Whether the choices Wizards of the Coast and its predecessors make are correct or incorrect, we have to understand that at the end of the day, you have 2 choices. Okay, choice number 1 is a box of crayons. Limited, but still filled with infinite possibility, because there's an infinite amount of things you can create with this box of crayons, even though you only have like 20 colors to work with. I mean, yeah, and after a while those 20 colors do get kind of boring. It's like, how many versions of blue do I really need? There's like 8 in here. So but still it represents infinite possibility. Now, Dungeons & Dragons originally had 4 races and 4 classes. And even though it was very limited, it presented infinite possibility. And a lot of the complaints about early Dungeons & Dragons was very cookie cutter. I mean, every fighter was like every other fighter. Every wizard was like every other wizard. But then, because of the limitations, it forced people to look at the infinite possibilities of those limited choices and go, well, what can I do with this that's original and unique, even though I only have these choices available to me? So, infinite possibilities. Or you could look at it like this. This is $20. It represents money, income, greed, supporting your family. And at the end of the day, whether it's a couple of people hand printing a product in a garage or a major corporation that owns Wizards of the Coast called Hasbro, Your job is to make money because Hasbro D&D at this point in time does not offer you anything, like it's Target. We don't sell role-playing. It's a widget. We're not selling anything anybody else isn't already selling out there. We have competition. What we're selling is customer service. What we're selling is the best possible experience you can have, so you give us your money. And that's why these books exist. That's why Tasha's Book of Uncontrollable, Hideous, whatever, and all the Splat books that came out with 2nd edition, and all the Splat books and World books that came out with 3rd edition, and all the stuff that has been coming out for 5th edition. It's because between the choice of infinite possibility with limited sources or money, people are going to choose money, especially if you're a corporation whose job it is to make money. And they're going to release the product that they think will make them the most money, because they know, maybe, back in Gygax's time, there wasn't really any competition for the first couple of days, the first year or two, so they could do whatever they wanted with D&D. They could, it's like, oh, here it is. We tried to take our little miniature game and, Conan and Lord of the Rings and Camelot and turn it into this little role-playing experiment. We don't know what's going to happen, but whatever. Nobody else is doing it. And then 2 years later, it's like, well, fuck, other people are doing it. We got to do it better. So that's why this happens. So this is what my friend GM Bloodworth of Unscripted Unchained wrote in response to my sneak peek, which I think I spelled wrong, of Tasha's Cauldron. Too many classes and subclasses. Eliminates all but the physical appearances of races and species, except, of course, we know now that Tasha's is also going to do the same thing that Pathfinder did and some of the other games that are now coming out did, which allows you to change the races and the species look, which is not new because 2nd and 3rd edition had the Savage Species books, which let you do the same thing. Eliminate all but the physical appearances of the races and the species, leaving anyone playing with no meaningful choices of class race selection. Of course, the whole point, as far as Wizards of the Coast believes, is to present their base with infinite choices, so that every choice matters, so that no two X's are the same. Of course, they're really doing this for money, but they're also doing it because they see what the competition is offering and they want to remain competitive with the competition. So here is an infinite, more choices, so now we don't have that complaint. Well, every wizard looks like every other wizard. Every fighter is just a guy with a two-handed sword. It's like, no, here's more choices. Go ahead, break the game. Look, here's guns. More choices. What do we need to do to make you people happy so you will keep giving us money instead of taking your money elsewhere? Here's more choices. Here's a bunch of meaningful choices. Except, of course, when everybody's special, no one's special. And what he's saying, what DM Bloodworth is saying is that, there's, if everybody can be everything, then there's really no meaningful choices. There is something to say about the infinite possibilities of the limited choices available to you in Dungeons & Dragons, because it's like, well, what can I do with this? How can I use my imagination to take this in new, unusual places? And if you look at the most iconic Dungeons & Dragons characters, the ones that stick with us to this day, Drizzt, Bigby, Mordenkainen, Elminster, they were built, go for the eyes, boo. They were built with limited choices, but infinite possibility. And they became iconic because the individuals creating these characters said, well, what are the possibilities I can do with these limitations and where can I take them? And that made them iconic. So, 5e is not Dungeons & Dragons. It might have been intended to be D&D on the drawing board, but it certainly hasn't been post-publication. 5e on paper, if you look at D&D Next, probably was the closest to D&D that D&D at this age is ever going to get. It took all the good ideas from 4th and the video games and the target audience, and it took all the ideas from the previous editions and tried to combine them to make a product that was easily available to the audience that was coming to them at the point in time when 5th edition released. There was lots of careful thinking into the creation of 5th edition because they were like, well, look at all the mistakes we made with 4th. Let's not do that again. And for the first year or two, the choices that Wizards of the Coast made were very refreshing. They were very different. They played 5e close to the chest to see what was going to happen with 5e and to see where players were going to take it. But unfortunately, choices were made. Some of the choices good choices, some of the choices bad choices. At the end of the day, the choices that Wizards of the Coast made and Hasbro made was because of this. And who is our target audience? Or who is it we think our target audience? And I'm not Wizards of the Coast's target audience anymore. At least they don't think I am. GM Bloodworth is not the Wizards of the Coast target audience anymore. Us old fucking fart D&D players who were playing D&D, 40 years ago in a cave by torchlight, where we only had one class and one race and one dice and we were happy. And in my day, we played D&D in the snow. We're not the target audience. The target audience, they think, is the Critical Role, Stranger Things, World of Warcraft crowd and the Magic players. And I mean, Hasbro has said, the CEO of Hasbro said at the 2020 shareholders meeting, I want Dungeons and Dragons and Magic to become the same thing. All the stuff that has happened before, fuck that. We want Dungeons and Dragons and Magic to become the same thing. So all that Magic money will start coming to Dungeons and Dragons, and all that Dungeons and Dragons money will start going to Magic. And on paper, that's a great idea because there's such a huge divide between Magic players and Dungeons and Dragons players to the point where there has been physical violence between Magic players and Dungeons and Dragons players. So trying to bring the two diverse groups, even though Magic was created by a D&D player and the iconic original legends were the D&D classes and races and characters that those D&D players played, and it was just something to do to spend the time while they were waiting for the D&D game to start. It was never meant to become what it was. But you gotta admit, those first 2 years or 3 years, they knew how to market the shit out of that thing brilliantly. So, yeah. Not the target audience. So I can understand why Wizards of the Coast are making the choices they're making, even if I don't agree with them. And I think GM Bloodworth can understand, hopefully, the choices why Wizards of the Coast are making the choices they're making, even if they don't agree with them. And this whole new, social justice, woke, whatever bullshit choices, I can understand why they're making their choices. And I totally approve of any attempt to bring people together and to erase the stigmas of racism or homophobia or anti-Semitism or whatever, and allow people the freedom to, hey, you want to identify as a half-orc female and you're a male? Okay, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, should give you the freedom to do that. And hopefully we are using D&D as a tool to allow you to have that freedom and to bring all these groups together. Of course, unfortunately, the way they're doing it is actually disenfranchising even more people and isn't a choice. So to say that Dungeons & Dragons is not Dungeons & Dragons, it is Dungeons & Dragons. Dungeons & Dragons is always going to be Dungeons & Dragons. Roll a d20, strength, dex, con, intelligence, wisdom, charisma, fighter, cleric, magic user, rogue. It's always going to be that. It's never going to be nothing but Dungeons & Dragons. It's not the Dungeons & Dragons that you and I have in our mind of the way Dungeons & Dragons should feel and run and work, but it's Dungeons & Dragons. I mean, not to defend Wizards of the Coast, except I have to defend Wizards of the Coast, and I have to, I understand the choices they're making. From a business point of view, as somebody who's worked in retail for fucking ever, as somebody who's run an old business, as somebody who works for a a corporation, as somebody who is, seen behind the scenes of how retail actually works. Why is the fucking Halloween stuff on the shelf in October? There are reasons, and that reason is this. So let's go on. D&D, the game, is quite frankly boring to play. It is soulless and devoid of meaningful choice and character creation. Critical Role would argue with us. As a dungeon master, the system and culture surrounding 5e makes it even less desirable to play that role at the table. The choice of character creation and the choice of character choice. It was only at best 20% before. Now it must be worse. I own the core books from all the systems, but D&D will mark the end. 5th edition will mark the end of D&D for me. I agree. I don't think 6th edition is going to offer me anything I can't find in other systems. And I'm at the point in my life where I can look at other systems and I can appreciate what other systems have to offer, and I can see, well, I want to do X. Here's a game that lets me do X, so I'm going to try and run and or play X. And if, you're lucky enough, like I guess GM Bloodworth is, that you can live someplace where it allows you to experiment. Unfortunately, I live in a city which, even though it has a multitude of game stores, is technically a college town, has a huge influx on paper of tourist money and big money from LA. This is a one-horse 5th edition town. If you cannot find anybody who wants to play anything else other than D&D 5th edition in Ventura. Why? I don't know. I assume Critical Role, and before that, World of Warcraft, and just because when Dungeons and Dragons, other systems, Dungeons and Dragons, other systems, Dungeons and Dragons, other systems. Wow, I could play. Why experiment? Why risk it? D&D's got everything I want. And if I want to tell a story of D&D that I can't tell at D&D, I'm just going to cut and paste and break it down, and it becomes the game I want. At which point, it's not fucking D&D; it's a different game. So why don't you just go buy the game you want to run and then convince people to play it? And you know who I'm talking. Yeah. So eliminates all but the physical appearances of races, species, leaving anyone playing no meaningful choice of class and race selection. Well, the whole point is to give you hundreds of choices, so each character is meaningful to that individual player. Except, of course, Wizards of the Coast, you have 48 years of D&D history showing you that, we don't need that. We were fine with 4 races and 4 classes, and we did meaningful choices, meaningful stories, Critical Role wouldn't exist if, and we all know I fucking hate Critical Role, but the idea of being able to tell an amazing story within the limits of Dungeons and Dragons, which is how Critical Role started before the money came in. But still, at the end of the day, they're telling a story with a very limited tool base. Now they've, hacked it and turned it into something else. What Taliesin and Mercer and Marissa play is not Dungeons & Dragons. It's the Critical Role role-playing game. But they developed that over years, and they all agreed upon it, so it works for them. While the various choices and in games I've been in where people have tried to cut and paste and turn D&D into something that isn't D&D, partially because of Critical Role, haven't worked because the agreement wasn't made with the player base that we're going to do this. So especially when you're running games at game stores where nobody knows what you're talking about, and somebody comes down and is like, oh, you guys are playing D&D, I'm going to play my tiefling arcanist warlock healer who's also got, I decided to use the alternate rules, so I'm a tiefling, but I have the dwarf stats, and I got 2 backgrounds, and I can throw out 3d8 of healing around in addition to making 2 attacks, both of which do a d12, and I'm first level. Well, you're going to get that, but, that's whatever. But if you're running it at your home, Critical Role, everybody agrees, Critical Role, then the infinite possibilities within the limits of Dungeons & Dragons, crayon box, are available, which is why at the end of the day, Critical Role worked. They knew what they were doing, and then they turned it into a show because they wanted to make... And they don't play D&D, so fucking stop comparing us. So, but I understand his point. I understand what he's trying to say, and he's trying to say is, we did an amazing job, and we have done an amazing job, and we continue to do amazing jobs with the limited rule set that were available. And really, if you want to tell a different story that Dungeons & Dragons doesn't tell, find the game that tells that story and shout it to the rooftops, because chances are if you just walk in and say, I want to run, Lamentations of the Flame Princess, or I want to run Star Wars, or I want to run, Five Torches Deep or Tales from the Loop, 99% of the audience is going to go, get the torches, get the pitchforks, get the rope. He mentioned a game that wasn't D&D. Fuck him. But then you're going to go, I'm going to run D&D, but I'm going to change it so it's not D&D. 99% of your audience is going to go, get the torches, get the rope, get the pitchforks. Fuck him. He's trying to change D&D, and I want to play my Tiefling Warlock artifactor that can heal 3d8 around without doing it. Blah, 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 blah. I will not buy Tashas, especially since everything that they're giving in Tashas I can get for free on the internet by just going to the Unearthed Arcana website or going to the SRD for the other 3 products that they're milking to use Tashas. And the fact that the stuff that they're doing in Tashas is one of the huge things is nerfing existing skills and abilities and spells like Booming Blade. And, there's nothing in Tashas I can't find for free on the web. But Wizards of the Coast hopes you don't know that, because at the end of the day, Dungeons & Dragons is not about this anymore, and hasn't been for a long time. It's about this, especially when there's competition. So my response to his comments that, whatever it was that we loved about Dungeons & Dragons isn't there anymore. Of course it's not. It's not our D&D. It's somebody else's D&D. So we play the version of D&D we love, the way we love it, or we find a game that tells the story we want to tell that isn't D&D. Because at the end of the day, D&D is Ritz crackers. It's Monopoly. It's great for a while. You can do a lot of things with the limitations that are available for you, but there's better offers. But D&D worked when it worked and when it was so iconic because you had infinite possibilities within a limited tool set. 4 races, 4 classes, and yet Mordenkainen, Elminster, Drizzt, Bigby, Tasha, Robert, Lord, the Ravenloft Guide, Lord Soth, Strahd, Tomb of Horrors. 4 races, 4 classes told an infinite, Dragonlance, an infinite amount of stories with a limited tool set. It was a box of crayons. It's not that box. And it's a box of crayons again. Here's an infinite amount of possibilities with a limited tool set. We're just giving you more crayons. Now it's the deluxe box of crayons. And you're like, well, I only need RGB. It's like, no. Here's more crayons. So if somebody wants to have a gun, here are the rules for guns. We don't care if it ruins your specific game, DM. We're not in the market to make you happy. We're in the market to make... And speaking of, with the holidays coming up, please take a moment to consider supporting the OGG Adventures, because I'd like to be able to buy my family presents. And this is my only job. If you haven't subscribed to the OGG Adventures yet, please consider subscribing to the OGGM Adventures. It helps you keep informed of what's going on and helps me know which direction my audience wants this channel to go. And if I hit 500 subs by January 1st, I'm going to do something crazy. Please like, please share, please subscribe, please support. And if you appreciate the words that are coming out of my mouth hole, please comment down below. Happy holidays. Stay safe, stay warm, stay classy. I will talk to you losers later.